Hi, and welcome to Simplify Industry Compliance Management with AWS Config. We are so excited to talk to you today about compliance at scale and how AWS Config can help you with that challenge. Let's first do some introductions. My name is Andres Silva. I'm a Principal Specialist Solutions Architect with the Management Tools team here at AWS. And with me today here, I have Steven Sellers. Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Andres. I'm Steve Sellers. I am a cloud security engineer at Lockheed Martin. I'm primarily responsible for ensuring that configuration compliance is audited and enforced here at Lockheed Martin.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Now, here's the agenda of the topics we're going to cover today for you. We're going to start by talking about compliance in the cloud and the challenges related to that. We're then going to explain what AWS Config is and how it can help you with that challenge. After that, we're going to dive deep into a feature of AWS Config called Conformance Packs. That is going to be key for compliance at scale. Then we'll focus our attention on the topic of reporting resource and compliance data using AWS Config. And then to wrap it up, we're going to hear from Steve and how customer Lockheed Martin has used AWS Config to address the challenge of compliance in the cloud. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk first about the challenge of compliance in the cloud. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, as organizations implement or migrate workloads into the cloud, they quickly reap the benefits of agility and experimentation. That allows organizations to quickly prototype ideas and iterate on them. However, as we all know, with great power comes great responsibilities. Customer want the agility that the cloud brings, but they also need good governance. And in many cases, they need to meet very strict compliance requirements. Now, the speed and scale at which cloud resources operate makes it impossible to use some of the traditional mechanisms to track resources like spreadsheets or static databases. Think, for example, of an auto-scaling group, or an EMR cluster, or a Fargate cluster. These services are spinning up and down resources all the time as your usage scales up and down. And as that happens, you need to make sure that you're meeting compliance requirements around security and configuration. Now, you can see how that can be a challenge when operating infrastructure in the cloud. However, we at AWS understand that challenge better than no one. And that's the reason that we provide, under the management and governance umbrella, a rich set of services that can help you meet that challenge. Now, how do you do it? Well, by leveraging and combining these services, you can achieve the agility and control required to manage cloud infrastructure efficiently. Now, at the core of these set of services is one of our key detective platforms, AWS Config. What is AWS Config? Well, AWS Config is a service that enables you to assess, audit, and evaluate the configuration of AWS resources automatically. Once you enable it, we start tracking all the resources that are created or modified. Every time one of those resources is created or modified, we take a picture in time with the configuration settings. Whenever it's modified, we keep track of the changes, and we keep that rich configuration timeline history for up to 7 years. That in itself can be very powerful just for resource management. But in addition to that, AWS Config allows you to automate the evaluation of recorded configurations against desired configurations using a feature called AWS Config Rules. Let me explain by using an example. Let's say that you want to make sure that all S3 buckets in your accounts, when created, do not have public access enabled. This is a very common use case. You can deploy an AWS Config Manage rule that assesses that every time an S3 bucket is created or modified. Now, we provide a rich set of rules that evaluate some of the most common use cases. We call those managed rules because they're curated by AWS. But you also have the ability of deploying your own custom rules powered by the AWS Lambda platform. Let's look at how the process is automated in this slide. As you can see, as resources are created or modified, AWS Config is tracking everything automatically. Once something changes, the rule triggers, evaluates the state of the resource, and when something non-compliant is detected, you can define in the rule how you want to handle that. You can either just send a notification, or you can take advantage of a very powerful feature called remediation actions. What remediation actions allows you to do is configure an AWS Systems Manager automation document that fixes the non-compliant resource and brings it back to the correct state by making direct API calls to the platform. So with this powerful feature, you can greatly simplify the challenge of bringing things back into compliance. This is super important when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of accounts in multiple regions. So as you can see, a config rule maps to a control that you need to assess in your environment, and you can simplify the process of doing that, taking advantage of config rules and remediation actions. Now, most likely, you're going to always have many controls, and you will need to deploy them across many accounts and regions. How do you simplify that? That's where Conformance Packs come in. What are Conformance Packs? Conformance Pack is a collection of AWS config rules and remediation actions that can be easily deployed as a single entity across multiple accounts and across multiple regions. Now, once deployed, these rules are immutable, which means nobody can change them in the individual accounts. This ensures the integrity of the compliance data that is being collected. You can author conformance packs by using the very familiar CloudFormation YAML syntax. Put them in a template and define there all the rules and remediation actions you want to deploy. Then use a console or the CLI to deploy them across your entire organization. Now, to help you get started, what we've done is provide a number of sample conformance packs that are based on some of the most common operational best practices and some of the most common compliance frameworks out there. The idea is that you take these sample packs and you modify them, customize them to fit your specific needs. Now, once you have deployed these conformance packs, you need to be able to collect that compliance data and report on it. How can you simplify that? Well, AWS Config provides some powerful features for data aggregation and reporting. Let's talk briefly about aggregators and advanced query. An aggregator is a feature of AWS Config that allows you to collect and centralize all the configuration and compliance data from multiple accounts and multiple regions into a single location. You can set up an aggregator to collect data from one account in multiple regions, for a set of accounts, or for an entire organization. And once you've set that up, now you can easily get insights from that aggregator by using either the console or the API. Or you can also customize the reports you want to create by using advanced query. Let's talk a little bit more about advanced query. This is a feature of AWS Config that allows you to query the current configuration and compliance data from either a single account or multiple accounts and regions by using the data in an aggregator. You have full control over the fields and criteria that you want to extract. And once you create your queries, you can export the data very easily. The queries are created using the very familiar SQL syntax. And to get started, we provide a number of sample queries to help you understand how it works. As I said before, once you export the data, you can once you run the report, you can export the data with either JSON format or CSV, and you can automate the entire process to create dashboard or reporting. So as you can see, by combining the ability of conformance packs to implement automated controls and reporting using features like aggregators and advanced queries, you can simplify greatly the task associated with the big challenge of compliance in the cloud. Now, put it all together, let's quickly watch a demo on how this works. So in this demo, we're going to show you the power of remediation actions, how you can combine that with conformance packs, and then we'll touch a little bit on data aggregation and advanced queries. First, let's talk about remediation actions. So I have a managed rule here that I've deployed. It's called restricted common ports. This rule checks if a security group has a non-approved port opened. And I've optionally have deployed here a remediation action that you can optionally deploy with a config rule that removes any non-approved ports. I've set up the remediation not to be automatic so that I can show you here in the demo how it works. But once I've deployed that rule, it has detected a couple of security groups that are non-compliant. And upon further investigation, if I dig deeper into that group, I can see that the reason for that is because somebody has opened ports 22 and 3389 to the world. So that's a problem. So let's show you how remediation actions can simplify the process of bringing that resource back to compliance. Once the resource has been detected and flagged as not compliant, then if I click on it here on the rule, I have the option to remediate, as you can see here. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click remediate. As you can see, that it has been queued, and after a few seconds, it will be complete. So if I go back to the EC2 console here and I refresh the security group settings, I can see that that remediation action has removed those non-approved security inbound rules. So this is a very powerful way of addressing non-compliant resources. But what you want to do is take these config rules and remediation actions and make them part of a conformance pack. Conformance packs will allow you to deploy a set of rules and remediation actions to a number of accounts and regions, depending on your specific needs. We provide, if we click here on Deploy Conformance Pack, a number of samples that you can get started with. And the idea is that you take one of these samples and you customize it to fit your needs. You can find the code for the samples here in our documentation. The goal is that you take them, you open the template like you can see here, and you add to it or remove any specific controls that are required for the compliance framework you want to follow or the best practices. You can also add, as you can see here, remediation actions to further simplify the process of addressing non-compliant resources. So this again will allow you to define the controls that you want to track, deploy them at scale. But you have to make sense of that data that is being collected. And that's where an aggregator can come in handy. An aggregator is a mechanism that allows you to take all that data that is being collected across multiple accounts and across multiple regions, put them all in a central place so that you can make sense of it by looking at the summary information like you can see here, resource inventory information, compliance state based on the different rules you have deployed. So this in itself is a very powerful way to give you a quick picture of where you're at in terms of compliance, in terms of resource inventory across all your accounts and across all the regions you have deployed. But very often you have specific data that you want to pull, specific questions that you want to answer from that data. And that's where Advanced Query comes in. Advanced Query allows you to use SQL syntax to pull specific information from the config data to answer a lot of important questions you may have about resource inventory, about compliance. We provide a number of sample queries to get you started. So for example, let's take the sample query that is called AMIs in use. I have it here, as you can see. And this query basically does a select on a number of fields, and then has a where clause to narrow it down to EC2 instances and a specific AMI. If you wanted to know all the different fields you can query on, the documentation here on GitHub has the entire resource schema, so you can get a better idea of what fields you can query for. But this query here is very powerful to give you information about what instances are using a specific AMI across your entire organization. And when you run it, the results come back. You get very detailed information about, in this case, the specific instances that are using this AMI. You can take that data and export it as JSON or CSV, so you can create a report, maybe use the data for a dashboard. And of course, this information can not only be extracted from the console, but you can also extract it from the API. So as you can see, by combining remediation actions with conformance packs, with an aggregator, and with advanced query, you can greatly simplify the task of collecting the information you need and addressing for compliance purposes and addressing compliance at scale while running AWS workloads. So as you can see, these tools can help you greatly simplify this process when you manage multiple accounts across multiple regions. We also at this point want to call out the many partners that we have that can help you with the compliance challenge. If you need help implementing the solutions and the features that we've discussed today, one of our consulting partners can help you design and implement conformance packs and remediation actions. We also have technology partners that offer solutions that can help you with compliance in the cloud. You see some of those in the slide here. Now, many of our customers have successfully tackled the compliance challenge in the cloud. And we want to show you an example of that today. So I'm excited to have with us today Steven Sellers, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how Lockheed Martin has used some of these tools to simplify compliance at scale. Steve?
So today I'm going to be going over our existing solution, what we've used in the past, and largely what we still use today, and how we're using AWS Config today. We'll talk about the deployment strategy, how we deploy AWS Config, and some workflows including audit, remediation, and event-based notifications. And we'll talk about some of the results that we've seen as a result of using AWS Config. So at Lockheed Martin, we started with an event-based serverless application developed internally, which we named Hexagen. This solution is still in use today, but we're looking to AWS Config as the next evolution in configuration compliance management. Some of Hexagen's pain points that we've had to deal with over time include largely maintenance overhead. So the core framework requires careful handling of payload responses from integrated rules, and so we have to manage DynamoDB database updates, making sure we're appropriately handling creates, deletes, reads. New rules require determining event triggers and configuring the framework to recognize them. And then visibility into compliance for our managed accounts requires custom front-end development, which of course takes a lot of time for our development team. With AWS Config, we're mitigating a lot of these pain points. It abstracts many components in comparison with Hexagen, resulting in reduced complexity and increased dev team velocity. Some of the core requirements that we need to meet in this AWS native solution include support for all the commercial regions and GovCloud regions. We need the ability to provide out-of-the-box rules, a rule set that enables us to scale quickly in meeting our security requirements. And due to the sheer scale of our enterprise, how many accounts we have, the solution really needs to be scalable, performant, and maintainable at that scale. And then this also frees up our developers from maintaining a custom front-end solution, right? The AWS Config provides a native front-end dashboard, and we really want that and need that native visibility into compliance data for not only us, but our customers as well. Our deployment strategy can really be broken down into two primary components. First are the managed account resources. This consists of any resource that lives on a managed account, and these resources are deployed via a centralized pipeline used by multiple delivery teams, and it leverages CloudFormation stack sets to deploy. And the second component are our centralized account resources. This consists of any resource that lives in our central account managed by our internal delivery team responsible for the solution. This centralized model allows us to more easily update and maintain the infrastructure needed to support the implementation of our config rules and remediation configurations when compared to those same resources hosted in the managed accounts. Right? It's much easier to manage these things in a central account and provide the TLC around them. These resources also support are also source controlled and deployed via a pipeline, again leveraging CloudFormation. So first we'll talk about the audit workflow, how we take a resource that has whose configuration has just changed and how we determine whether it's compliant or non-compliant. So first, the AWS config service recognizes this resource change. If it's a AWS managed config rule, all of that happens behind the scenes, right? It just happens within the config service itself, which is on that right-hand side of the diagram, the managed accounts. But if it's a custom rule, we're targeting a centralized Lambda function to queue these audit events. So the config service recognizes this resource change for one or more of our given rules. It sends a payload to a Lambda function that we're calling queue audit here. And really all that Lambda function does is take that payload and based on the parameters that we've configured the rule with, determines what SQSQ it needs to send that payload to. So at that point, it sends a message to an SQSQ called Audit, and that SQSQ is actually an event source for our Audit Lambda function. And so this can be, it's really a one-to-one relationship between the queue and the function. So if we have n rules, n custom rules configured with config, there's n queues and n Lambda function audits. So that Lambda function picks up the payload off the SQSQ. And within that Lambda function execution, it determines the compliance at that time, compliant or non-compliant. Once it's determined that compliance, it will then send a message back to the config service in the managed account to record that compliant event, that compliance evaluation. So some key characteristics here are that we're covering all regions. You can see the regions laid out in the diagram. So we're able to cover all regions, but also we're centralizing the audit logic in a single account that allows us to quickly create and update custom rules, and allows us to ensure the operational health of those functions from a single region and single account versus multiple regions, or worse, multiple regions across every managed account. And of course, the SQSQs provide a buffer which enables us to maintain performance at scale, and also provides a retry mechanism if the audit functions encounter an error, such as throttling or timeouts. So now we'll talk about the remediation workflow. So once we determine whether a particular resource is compliant or non-compliant against a given rule, if it's non-compliant, of course, we want to remediate it. And of course, you can set that up via either manual remediation within config or automatic remediation. So a lot of times what we're trying to get towards is automatic remediation in the long term. So the first thing that happens is config recognizes that, okay, now I have a non-compliant resource. So step one is starting an automation execution using an SSM document. And really all that SSM document is doing is taking the payload that config sends to it and effectively forwarding that payload to an SQSQ in our central account. That's all part of step one. That queue here is called remediation events. From there, a Lambda function called remediation bootstrap takes messages off of that remediation events SQSQ. At that point, determines whether the resource in question has an exemption or not. So we host all of our exemptions in DynamoDB tables in our central account. If it does have an exemption, that's it. That's the end of the workflow. The resource won't be remediated, right? If it doesn't have an exemption, it'll proceed to step 3. And there's some optionality in the design here where if the remediation is simple enough that it can be performed via an SSM document, that's the path that we default to first. If it's more complex, maybe we have to call other systems to determine whether we should or shouldn't remediate or how we should remediate it. Then we'll go to step 3B, which is actually putting the message in a different SQSQ, in this case called remediate, where another Lambda function picks up that message and actually performs that remediation event. So we have some options, and depending on the complexity of what the remediation entails. And at that point, of course, it'll reach out to the managed account, assume a role, and remediate that resource's configuration to then be compliant. So some key characteristics here, again, I mentioned the 2 options for implementing remediation depending on complexity. So this further improves our team velocity in that where SSM documents are feasible, the overhead and skill set associated with implementing a Lambda function isn't required. And then similar to the audit workflow, we're centralizing the implementation of the remediation logic and the exemptions database. We're quickly able to push new remediations and updates to our central accounts as a result here, versus having to deploy these updates to all managed accounts. So we'll talk about event-based notifications here. And really our goal in providing event-based notifications is to inform our managed account users that one of their resources become non-compliant against one of our config rules and may subsequently be automatically remediated. So that's the goal here. And we accomplish this by using an event-based solution with email integration. We're using EventBridge to provide that event-based architecture. So the first thing that happens is config determines that a resource is non-compliant. At that point, we have a EventBridge event rule set up called all events that picks up this event. It sends it to a default event bus in our central account. Another rule that further filters these events picks up that payload from EventBridge and sends it to an SNS topic called notifications. And really the only reason this SNS topic is here is to centralize the rest of the architecture into one region. So SNS, of course, is able to send to SQSQs in a different region than where it resides. So we're really using it as a glue component in this architecture. So at that point, the SNS topic notification sends it to an SQSQ, also called notifications. Like before you saw, this queue is configured as an event source for a Lambda function called notifications handler. So at this point, our Lambda function execution has the payload that was originally constructed by EventBridge, and we use the information in that payload. It provides a lot of good information that we can send to customers to construct an email body, and of course then it sends that email to the appropriate points of contact internally. So in this case, when resources become non-compliant, mere seconds or minutes later, the customer has an email in their inbox that says, hey, your thing is now turned non-compliant. You might be remediated on this. Go reach out here for more information. So some key characteristics of this is that the data provided in that event payload provides us with a good data set to provide to our customers. The use of queues allows us to aggregate events over a period of time, and then provide a list of non-compliant resources in an email versus sending one email for each and every non-compliant event. So if we have this configured without queues, they would get the email within seconds, but we want to aggregate that, right? If we're rolling out a rule and maybe there's thousands of non-compliant resources in someone's account, we don't want them getting 1,000 emails. We want to get one email with that list of non-compliant resources for them in their account. So some results that we found after using AWS Config here. First of all, it increased our development velocity. So in comparison to Hexagen, we no longer needed to determine API triggers, perform API calls to obtain resource inventory and configuration state. SSM docs make remediation implementation simpler. If an AWS managed rule supports the requirements, our security requirements, then no development is required for that audit implementation. And we found that this really actually reduced our lines of code by about 25% in comparison to Hexagen. And of course, there's a lower developer learning curve associated, again, further increasing our dev team's velocity. It also reduced faults in our environments. The ability to leverage AWS managed rules and abstract our resource inventory and configuration changes mitigates faults in comparison to our implementation of Hexagen. The less code we have to write, the less faults there are going to be overall. It increased our customer visibility and control. So the console view of rules and compliance status provided transparent, easy to understand insight into which really reduced customer questions and confusion and enables customers to work on burning down their non-compliance by having a native console view into their compliance statuses. So that no longer were customers as much asking which of my resources are compliant or non-compliant, or which rules and resources do I have an exemption for. It also provided us with the ability for customers to remediate themselves for remediations that aren't configured to automatically remediate. So when we're rolling out a new rule that we would like at one point to get into automatic remediation, we can actually provide the capability for that rule to remediate non-compliant resources, and customers can perform that remediation themselves. So this was a smoother transition from configuration requirement monitoring to automatic remediation at the end of the day. And then lastly, it provided aggregation visibility and reporting. Andres mentioned the ability to perform advanced queries against config aggregators. This really provides us an easy way to get compliance visibility into all of our accounts and generate metrics after that. Thank you for watching this session. I hope you really enjoyed it, and please complete the session survey at the end if you liked it. Thank you.